The town was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that made you notice the sound of your own footsteps. In one corner of that town lived a man who didn't quite fit in with everyone else. He was a single father, raising his young daughter with a calm patience that came from years of carrying heavy burdens. People in the neighborhood often said he was different, almost too sharp for a simple life. What most of them didn't know was that he had one of the brightest minds anyone could imagine. His IQ was far above normal, but he never bragged about it. Instead, he chose a simple life, working quietly, keeping to himself, and pouring all his love into his daughter. Life hadn't been easy for him. Losing his wife had left a scar that never truly healed. Some days he would smile for his little girl, but the pain in his eyes always told another story. His world was small but safe. Home, work, school runs, and evenings with his daughter. He liked it that way, away from complications, away from drama. But life has its own way of shaking things up, and his calm world was about to be disturbed in the most unexpected way. The FBI had come into town for an investigation. No one knew the details, but people whispered about coded messages, strange disappearances, and a case that no one seemed to solve. The town was buzzing with curiosity, and then one evening, his doorbell rang. Standing at his door was a woman in a sharp suit, her presence impossible to ignore. She was an FBI agent, confident, focused, and with eyes that seemed to see right through people. She introduced herself politely, but her tone carried the weight of authority. She told him the agency had heard about his remarkable abilities, and they needed his help. At first, he wanted to refuse. His life was built around protecting his daughter and keeping things simple. Getting involved with the FBI was the opposite of simple. He almost closed the door on her, but she smiled faintly, leaned in, and whispered something that made him pause. "Solve the mystery, and I'm yours." He didn't know what she meant by that. Was it just a playful challenge, or was she hinting at something more? The words hung in the air, bold and unsettling. He stood there for a moment, uncertain whether to laugh or be annoyed. But one thing was clear. She wasn't leaving without making her point. She slid a small folder across his kitchen table later that evening. It was filled with numbers, letters, and strange patterns that seemed impossible to crack at first glance. He sat there, studying the papers, his daughter quietly drawing at the other end of the table. The agent watched him closely, her arms crossed, as if waiting to see if the rumors about his brilliance were true. He tried not to give her the satisfaction of a quick answer. Instead, he looked back at her calmly and asked, "Why me?" She shrugged and said softly, "Because no one else has managed to make sense of it. And because I think you can." There was something about the way she said it, not demanding, but almost trusting, that unsettled him. He wasn't used to people looking at him like that. For years, people saw him as just the quiet single dad. But now, this stranger saw him as something else. Someone capable of solving problems that even the FBI couldn't. It stirred something inside him, a piece of himself he thought he had buried long ago. As the evening went on, he couldn't help but glance at her. She was different from what he expected an agent to be. Yes, she was professional, sharp, and serious, but there was also a warmth hidden beneath her tough exterior. He noticed the way she softened her voice when she spoke to his daughter, the way she smiled without meaning to when the little girl proudly showed her drawing. He hadn't seen that kind of mix, strength and gentleness, in someone for a long time. Still, he tried to push her away. He told her he wasn't interested in puzzles that came with danger. But she leaned closer, her voice lowering just enough to feel personal. "This isn't just about the case. Sometimes mysteries find the right person to solve them. And maybe this one found you." He didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to laugh off her words, but another part of him, the part that still longed for meaning beyond daily routines, felt strangely drawn in. That night, after she left, he sat by his daughter's bedside, watching her sleep. The house was silent again, but his mind wasn't. The folder of codes sat on the table downstairs, pulling at him like a magnet. He knew he could solve it if he wanted to. But he also knew that solving it might change everything. And deep down, he couldn't ignore the agent's challenge. Her voice still echoed in his head. "Solve the mystery, and I'm yours." The next morning, when he saw her again at the small coffee shop in town, she greeted him with a smirk, as if she already knew he hadn't been able to let it go. He shook his head, smiling faintly in spite of himself, and told her he would take a look at the codes, just a look, nothing more. She only raised an eyebrow and said, "That's all I need." In that moment, he realized something important. This wasn't just about helping the FBI or solving a riddle. This was about stepping out of a safe bubble he had built around himself. And maybe, just maybe, it was about letting someone new into his life, even if it scared him. He didn't know what the mystery would uncover, or what her daring words truly meant, but he knew one thing for certain. His quiet life would never be the same again. The sun was barely up when he sat at the kitchen table again, staring at the folder of codes and notes the agent had left with him. His daughter was still asleep, curled up with her favorite blanket, and the house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. He rubbed his eyes, fighting the urge to push it all aside, but his mind was already racing. The patterns on the page called out to him, daring him to look closer. It was like hearing an old song you hadn't played in years, unfamiliar at first, but then it pulled you right back. By the time his daughter wandered sleepily into the kitchen, he had already started scribbling numbers and letters across a notepad. She yawned and asked what he was doing, and he smiled gently, telling her it was just a puzzle. She tilted her head curiously, but didn't ask more. She trusted him, the way children do, without needing every answer. He poured her a glass of milk and pushed the cereal box toward her, trying to act like everything was normal, though inside, he could feel something stirring, a part of himself he hadn't used in a long time. Later that day, the agent showed up again. She was dressed the same way, sharp and professional, but her eyes carried a softer look when she greeted his daughter before turning to him. He handed her the notepad filled with scribbles. "It's not solved yet," he said quickly, almost defensively. She smirked, sliding the paper toward herself. "But you've already gone further than anyone else has in weeks." He tried not to feel proud, but something in her tone made his chest tighten. She believed in him. That wasn't something he felt very often. Most people around him either overlooked his abilities or brushed them off as quirks. But here was someone who saw his mind as valuable, and not just valuable, necessary. The two of them sat across from each other at the kitchen table, leaning over the codes. She explained little details from a case, the way the notes had been found, the strange timing of the messages. He listened carefully, asking questions she didn't expect, and more than once, she stopped mid-sentence, staring at him with something close to admiration. But as the minutes stretched into hours, the playful tension between them grew stronger. Every time she leaned closer to point at something, he caught the faint trace of her perfume, subtle but impossible to ignore. Every time their eyes met, it felt like there was a challenge there, one that went beyond the pages in front of him. He tried to keep his focus, but the way she smirked whenever he figured something out made it harder. She had that kind of confidence that was both frustrating and magnetic. His daughter peeked into the room at one point, watching them from the doorway. She smiled quietly to herself. It had been so long since she had seen her father this animated, this alive. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew one thing. This woman had brought a spark back into his eyes. That evening, as they took a break, the agent leaned back in her chair, sipping from a cup of tea he had made. "You know," she said lightly, "I wasn't sure you'd even open the folder. You don't exactly look like the type who wants to get tangled up in all this." He raised an eyebrow, half amused. "And what type do I look like?" She smirked. "The type who hides his brilliance behind routine. The type who acts like he doesn't care, but secretly, he can't resist a good mystery." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Maybe. Or maybe I just like peace and quiet." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Then why didn't you walk away?" The question lingered in the air. He didn't have an answer he could put into words, not without admitting to himself what he was starting to feel. There was the case, of course, the thrill of solving something unsolved. But there was also her, the way she looked at him as if he mattered, the way her voice softened when she teased him. Something about her made the walls he had built around himself feel less necessary. That night, after she left, he found himself restless. He sat by the window, staring out into the quiet streets of the town. He thought about his late wife, about the promises he had made to keep his daughter safe, and to never let anything risk their fragile little world. But now here was this agent, pulling him into something bigger than himself. A part of him felt guilty for even enjoying her presence. Another part of him, though, felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. The following day, they met at the local library to dig through old records connected to the case. She walked in carrying a stack of files, but it wasn't the files that caught his attention. It was the way she smiled, quick and unguarded, when she saw him already waiting at the table. They worked side by side for hours, trading ideas, sometimes disagreeing, sometimes laughing when one of them made a mistake. It was strange how natural it felt. Two people from completely different worlds, and yet somehow it fit. As the day faded into evening, she closed one of the files with a sigh and looked at him. "You know, you could walk away from this anytime. I wouldn't blame you. This isn't your responsibility." He looked back at her steadily. "And leave a mystery unsolved." She grinned, shaking her head. "I knew it. You're hooked." For the first time in a long time, he didn't deny it. He was hooked, not just on the puzzle in front of them, but on the strange connection growing between them. He didn't know where it would lead or what it meant, but he knew one thing. He couldn't imagine walking away anymore. The library lights flickered softly as the clock struck 9. Most people had already left, but he and the agent were still buried in old files. She leaned against the table, tired but determined, while he scribbled on his notepad, connecting pieces others had missed. There was a moment when he looked up and caught her watching him, not with suspicion, not even with curiosity, but with a quiet kind of admiration. She quickly glanced away, pretending to focus on the papers, but he noticed. As they packed up to leave, something in one of the files caught his attention. It was a reference to a name he hadn't heard in years. For a moment, his chest tightened, and he froze. He flipped the page back and forth, making sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. But it was there, linked to the case, almost like a ghost reaching out from his past. He quickly closed the file, not wanting her to see his reaction. They walked out into the cool night air. She was talking about strategy, about next steps, but he was silent, his mind stuck on what he had just read. She noticed the shift in him. "Something's wrong," she said softly, not as an agent, but as a woman who had begun to read him well. He shook his head, quickly. "It's nothing." But she didn't believe him. The truth was, the case had brushed against a wound he thought had long healed. His late wife had once been connected to people who lived in that world, the world of secrets, codes, and danger. He had left it behind after her death, vowing never to step into it again. And yet here it was, circling back, forcing him to face the parts of his past he had carefully locked away. That night, sleep didn't come easy. He sat at the edge of his daughter's bed, watching her breathe peacefully, her small hand curled against the blanket. She was the reason he had built a quiet life. Everything he did was for her safety, her happiness. He had promised himself that nothing from his past would ever touch her. But now, the shadows were creeping close again, and he wasn't sure if he could keep the promise he made. The next morning, the agent knocked on his door earlier than expected. She carried 2 cups of coffee, handing him one with a half-smile. "You look like you didn't sleep much," she said. He smirked faintly. "Neither did you." For a while, they sipped in silence, the air between them filled with unspoken thoughts. Finally, she leaned forward, her voice softer than usual. "You know, you don't have to keep everything inside. Everyone has scars. Some are visible, some aren't. But they shape us." He looked at her, surprised. She didn't talk like an agent in that moment. She talked like someone who understood pain. And then, almost reluctantly, she told him a little about her own past. Years ago, she had trusted someone she thought was on her side. But that trust had been broken in the worst way. It had nearly cost her career, and it had scarred her ability to let people close. Since then, she had buried herself in her work, chasing justice, as if solving cases could fix the cracks in her heart. She spoke in short, guarded sentences, but the weight behind them was heavy. For the first time, he saw her not as the sharp, unshakable FBI agent, but as a woman carrying her own invisible battles. It made her human in a way he hadn't expected. He found himself wanting to tell her about his wife, about the grief he still carried, about how every decision he made revolved around protecting his daughter. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he just nodded quietly, letting her know he understood. They returned to the codes, but now their connection felt different. It wasn't just about solving puzzles anymore. It was about understanding each other's hidden wounds. Every glance, every small smile carried more meaning. There was a comfort in knowing they weren't alone in their struggles. Later that day, as they walked down the quiet streets toward the diner, his daughter ran ahead, laughing as she spotted her favorite spot by the window. The agent followed behind, her gaze softening as she watched the little girl. Inside, the three of them sat together, almost like a family. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine what life could be like if things were different, if his world wasn't full of loss, and hers wasn't full of danger. But reality had a way of reminding them. As they left the diner, she got a call. Her tone shifted immediately, serious, focused. The lead they had been chasing was moving faster than expected. Danger was closer than either of them realized. She ended the call and looked at him, her eyes filled with something between worry and determination. "This case isn't just numbers on a page anymore," she said firmly. "It's moving. And if we're not careful, it could move straight toward you and your daughter." His heart sank. This was exactly what he had feared, that stepping into this puzzle would drag his daughter into a world she didn't belong in. He wanted to walk away, to close the door and lock it tight. But when he looked at the agent, and then at his little girl holding his hand, he knew he couldn't. Walking away might keep them safe for a moment, but it wouldn't erase the danger. The only way out was through. That night, he sat alone after putting his daughter to bed. The agent's words echoed in his mind, but so did her earlier confession about scars and trust. Maybe this was more than just a case. Maybe it was a test of courage, not just for his mind, but for his heart. When he closed his eyes, he could still hear her playful whisper from that first night. "Solve the mystery, and I'm yours." At the time, he thought it was just a taunt, just part of her boldness. But now he wasn't so sure. Maybe the real mystery wasn't the code at all. Maybe it was the two of them, two broken souls trying to find a way to heal. The night air carried a chill that made him pull his jacket tighter. The town had always felt safe, predictable. But now every sound outside his window made him uneasy. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. The folder of codes sat on the table again, and though he wanted to ignore it, his mind refused to rest. Each number, each symbol, seemed to whisper that time was running out. The agent showed up just past midnight. He was surprised to see her, but the look on her face told him something had shifted. She didn't come with her usual calm confidence. This time, her eyes were sharp, alert, scanning every corner of the room before she sat down. She lowered her voice, as though the walls themselves might be listening. "They know you're helping me," she said. The words hit him hard. His first thought was of his daughter upstairs, sleeping peacefully in her room. His second thought was regret for ever agreeing to get involved. He leaned forward, his voice tense. "I told you, I can't risk her safety. If this gets anywhere near her," she cut him off quickly, her tone firm but steady. "I won't let anything happen to her. I promise." Promises, he thought bitterly, were fragile things. He had made so many himself and failed to keep them all. But when she said it, something in her eyes made him believe she meant it. She wasn't just speaking as an agent. She was speaking as someone who cared. The next day, everything changed. As they walked his daughter to school, he noticed a car parked too long near the playground. The windows were tinted, and though most people wouldn't have thought twice, his instincts screamed at him. He didn't say anything, not wanting to scare his little girl, but he exchanged a quick glance with the agent. She saw it too. That evening, she insisted they stay somewhere safer. He argued at first, stubborn about not disrupting his daughter's life. But when she placed a firm hand on his shoulder and said, "This isn't just a puzzle anymore. This is real," he knew she was right. They packed a few essentials, and for the first time in years, his home felt less like a safe haven and more like a target. They checked into a small safe house arranged by the bureau. It wasn't much, just plain walls and a stiff couch, but it was secure. His daughter curled up on the bed with her stuffed animal, unaware of the full danger, and the two adults sat at the kitchen table again, this time with the weight of reality pressing on them. He looked at her, frustration written on his face. I should have never opened that folder. None of this was supposed to touch her. She leaned closer, her voice quiet but filled with conviction. You didn't cause this. Whoever's behind these codes did. And now, the only way to keep her safe is to finish what we started. He hated that she was right. The safe option no longer existed. The only way forward was through the storm. As the night stretched on, they worked side by side, their minds chasing connections in the codes. At one point, his daughter woke from a nightmare and stumbled into the kitchen. She clung to him, and he whispered gently, calming her fears. The agent watched quietly from across the room. In that moment, she saw not just a man with a brilliant mind, but a father who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. She felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. When the little girl was back in bed, the agent finally spoke. You're stronger than you think, she said softly. He shook his head, his eyes tired. Strength doesn't matter if I can't protect her. She leaned closer, her gaze steady. You're not alone anymore. The words lingered between them. For a man who had lived in isolation for so long, those words struck deeper than she could have imagined. The breakthrough came just before dawn. He scribbled furiously across the notepad, connecting dots no one else had seen. It's not random, he whispered. It's a map. The codes are pointing to locations. His pulse quickened as he explained, and she leaned over, her eyes widening as the pattern became clear. This wasn't just communication, it was a plan, one that could be carried out within days. Before they could even process what it meant, a loud thud shook the safe house door. His daughter stirred in the other room. The agent jumped to her feet, her gun drawn, her eyes fierce. She signaled him to stay back. Another bang echoed, and he felt his chest tighten with fear, not for himself, but for his little girl. The banging stopped as quickly as it started. Silence hung heavy in the air. The agent kept her stance, waiting, listening. After a tense moment, she lowered her weapon slowly, but didn't relax. They're testing us, she said quietly. They know we're here. That night, sleep didn't come. He sat with his daughter in his arms, rocking her gently, while the agent stayed by the window, eyes scanning the darkness. Two worlds that should never have collided had now become inseparable. For the first time, he admitted to himself that his feelings toward her weren't just about respect or curiosity. Somewhere between the codes, the danger, and the whispered promises, she had become someone he trusted with his life, and his daughters. And that terrified him more than the knocks on the door. Because trust meant risk, and risk was something he had sworn to avoid. But as he watched her by the window, steady and unflinching, he realized something else. Maybe the real risk wasn't letting her in. Maybe the real risk was pushing her away. The safe house felt smaller with every passing hour. The windows were covered, the doors reinforced, but no amount of locks could quiet the unease in his chest. His daughter tried to stay cheerful, playing with her stuffed animal on the bed, but he could see the questions in her eyes. She was old enough to sense when something was wrong. He reassured her with soft smiles and gentle words, but inside, his heart was heavy. He hated that her world, once filled with innocence, was now shadowed by fear. The agent moved through the room like a guardian, checking the doors, checking the signals on her phone, always alert. Her presence was steady, grounding, yet he could tell the weight pressed on her too. She was carrying not just the case, but the safety of a little girl who had nothing to do with it. And she was carrying his trust, something he didn't give lightly. It was late when the sound came again. A faint scrape outside, then silence, then a sharp crack against the window. His daughter jumped, clutching her toy tight. He pulled her close, shielding her, while the agent moved swiftly, gun in hand, her voice low but firm. Stay with her. Don't move. Moments later, the glass shattered. A figure forced its way in through the side, masked and fast. Everything happened at once. The rush of movement, his daughter's scream, the crash of broken glass. He froze for a heartbeat, but the agent didn't. She moved with precision, her body between the danger and the child. Shots rang out, controlled, sharp. The intruder stumbled, then fled into the night. Silence followed, broken only by his daughter's trembling sobs. He wrapped his arms around her, whispering comfort, his own body shaking with a rush of fear. When he looked up, he saw the agent standing near the door, gun still raised, her breath heavy. But her eyes went straight to the child, softening immediately. She lowered the weapon and crouched down, speaking gently. "You're safe. I promise. No one will hurt you." It was then, in that moment, that he saw her differently. She wasn't just the bold agent who had smirked and challenged him with riddles. She was someone willing to stand in the line of fire for his daughter, someone whose promises weren't just words. His chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since the loss of his wife. After securing the house again, they sat together in the dim light. His daughter finally fell asleep, curled up against him, her tiny hand still clutching his shirt. He didn't want to let go of her, but his eyes drifted to the agent across the room. She was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, her shoulders tense. He could see the fatigue in her posture, but also the unshakable resolve. He broke the silence first. "You didn't have to do that. You could have just," she cut him off softly. "I did. Because I meant what I said. I won't let anything happen to her. Or to you." His throat tightened, and he struggled to find words. For so long, he had carried the weight of protecting his daughter alone. But here was someone who was willing to share that burden, someone who stepped into danger without hesitation. It was more than he had ever expected from anyone again. The night stretched on, quiet but heavy. At one point, he noticed her hand trembling slightly. Without thinking, he crossed the room and sat beside her. She tried to brush it off, but he shook his head. "You don't have to pretend you're unshakable. Not with me." She looked at him then, her guard slipping, and for the first time, he saw the vulnerability behind her strength. They sat in silence, side by side, their shoulders almost touching. No words were needed. The bond between them had shifted, no longer just about solving a mystery, no longer about professional roles. It was about trust, about shared fear, about something that felt dangerously close to love. The next morning brought a strange calm. The bureau reinforced security, and for a few hours, life almost felt normal again. He made breakfast for his daughter, flipping pancakes the way she liked, while the agent sat at the table, watching with a faint smile. For a brief moment, it felt like family, like a glimpse into a life that could have been if things were different. But reality pressed in again when new information came. The codes they had been working on weren't just maps, they were timelines. Plans for something bigger, something that could put more lives at risk, if not stopped. His discovery had cracked the case wide open, but it also meant the people behind it would stop at nothing to silence him. When the agent told him this, he felt the weight settle back on his shoulders. But instead of fear, he felt determination. "Then we finish it," he said firmly. "For her. For all of us." She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable, then nodded. Together. That evening, as his daughter played quietly in the other room, he and the agent leaned over the table once more, piecing together the last fragments of the puzzle. Their hands brushed once as they reached for the same paper, and neither pulled away right away. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the codes and the danger faded. There was only the unspoken truth between them, that this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about two people finding something worth fighting for, even in the darkest of times. When his daughter came running over, giggling about something in her game, the agent laughed softly, her eyes lighting up in a way he hadn't seen before. In that instant, he realized something profound. She wasn't just protecting them out of duty. She was here because she cared, truly cared. And maybe, just maybe, she was becoming part of something neither of them had expected, a family. The night ended with quiet conversation, with stories they hadn't shared before, with small smiles and laughter that cut through the heaviness. And though the danger still loomed outside, inside the safe house, for the first time in years, he felt hope. Because love had a way of showing up in the most unexpected places. And sometimes, it arrived in the form of an FBI agent who whispered challenges, stood in the line of fire, and unknowingly stole the heart of a single father. The morning sun broke through the blinds of the safe house, painting soft stripes across the walls. He stood by the window, staring out at the quiet street below. For once it seemed calm, almost normal, but he knew better. This wasn't the end. The codes, the maps, the danger, it was all building toward something bigger. The agent walked in, holding a fresh stack of files. She had barely slept, yet her eyes still carried the same determination. She set the papers down on the table and gave him a small smile. "We're close. One last piece, and we'll have them." He nodded, his mind already spinning through the possibilities. His daughter came bouncing into the room, rubbing her sleepy eyes, and he scooped her into his arms. For a moment, the weight of the world disappeared as she rested her head on his shoulder. He looked at the agent over his daughter's hair, silently telling her the same thing he told himself again and again. This is why it matters. Together, they sat down, combing through the final clues. Hours passed. At one point, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the messy scribbles across the notepad. Then suddenly it clicked. His eyes widened and his heart raced. "It's today," he whispered. "They're planning it today. And it's not just here. It's the city 2 hours away." The agent leaned forward, scanning his notes. She didn't question him. She didn't need to. She trusted him now completely. "Then we don't have time to waste," she said, already reaching for her phone. The next hours blurred into a whirlwind of motion, calls to headquarters, a rush drive, the city skyline looming closer with every mile. His daughter stayed safe with a trusted colleague, though leaving her behind had nearly torn him apart. He had looked her in the eyes, promised her he would be back, and kissed her forehead before stepping into the unknown. In the car, silence stretched between him and the agent, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people bracing for what was to come. He glanced at her once, noticing how tightly she gripped the wheel, and he realized just how much she was risking too. The plan unfolded quickly. The codes had pointed to a warehouse near the river. By the time they arrived, the area was crawling with agents. Yet somehow, in the chaos of flashing lights and shouts, he and her ended up side by side, moving into the dark building. The tension inside was unbearable. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow, felt like it could explode into danger. Then it happened, voices, footsteps, the men behind the codes. It all erupted in a blur of movement. Agents swarmed, orders were shouted, and for a terrifying moment, he found himself separated from her. He pressed himself against a wall, his heart pounding. And then across the room, he saw her, confronting one of the men directly. The standoff was tense, the danger real, and without thinking, he rushed forward, his mind working faster than his body. He yelled out a warning, just in time. She moved, swift and precise, disarming the man before he could act. When it was over, the suspects were in custody. The codes finally made sense, and the case was closed. But none of that mattered to him in that moment. All he cared about was that she was standing, safe, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He walked over, and without words, she looked at him and smiled, the kind of smile that carried relief, gratitude, and something more. Hours later, when the city had calmed and the paperwork had begun, they sat outside on the steps of the building. The night sky stretched above them, stars faint against the glow of the city lights. For the first time in days, there was peace. He spoke first, his voice low. "You were right. This wasn't just about the case." She turned to him, curious. "What was it about then?" He paused, searching for the words. Finally, he whispered, "It was about trust. About letting someone in again." She held his gaze, her eyes softer than he had ever seen. "And did you?" He thought of his daughter, safe and smiling. He thought of the nights at the table, the whispered conversations, the way she had shielded them without hesitation. He thought of the challenge she had given him the very first night. "Solve the mystery, and I'm yours." A small smile tugged at his lips as he answered, I already did. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, rich, alive with all the things neither of them needed to say out loud. She reached over, her hand brushing his, and he didn't pull away. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was standing alone. When they returned to his town days later, his daughter ran into his arms, laughing with relief. He lifted her high, holding her close, his heart overflowing. The agent stood nearby, watching, and when the little girl turned and hugged her too, it felt like something new had begun, something none of them had planned for, but all of them needed. Life wouldn't suddenly become simple. There would be challenges, memories that still hurt, scars that didn't fade. But for the first time since losing his wife, he felt ready to face it all. Not because he had solved a puzzle, not because he had cracked codes, but because he had found someone who believed in him, someone who stood by him, someone who had quietly become part of his world. That night, as they sat together on his porch, his daughter asleep inside, the agent teased him with a familiar smirk. "So," she whispered, "does this mean you're mine now?" He laughed softly, shaking his head in disbelief at how far they had come. "I think," he said, "we solved that mystery together." And for once, the man who had lived in silence, in solitude, finally felt at peace. Not because the danger was over, but because love had found him again, unexpected, unplanned, and undeniable.